hold the key to the White House. On your screens, we have for you the state's success rate for the last 10 presidential elections. So, for example, Nevada has voted for a candidate who went on to win the presidential elections 9 out of the last 10 times. Michigan has voted for a winning candidate 8 out of 10 times. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris has grabbed an unexpected lead in an Iowa poll. The poll conducted by Selzer and company gives Harris a 3 percentage point lead over Trump. This would come as a jolt for the Republicans, as Iowa had voted for Trump in the last 2 elections. It also has a success rate of 70% in the last 10 presidential elections. I'm now joined by public opinion pollster J.Ann Selzer. She's also the president of Selzer and company, which carried out the poll. And thank you so much for joining us. You're one of the most respected pollsters in the United States. But today, the poll that you have for Iowa is being questioned, of course, by the Trump camp. They have said they have completely rubbished it. And many of the fence sitters are also a little surprised. The Democrats, of course, welcome it. What's really giving you confidence today to go out and say that, yes, Kamala Harris has a 3-point lead over Donald Trump in the crucial state of Iowa?
Well, you're expressing greater confidence than I feel. This, of course, was a shock to see Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump. Donald Trump won Iowa the last 2 elections. So shock doesn't even quite do it justice, and confidence would be overstating the case. And as far as my reputation, let's hope it's intact after Election Day. I take the best shot I can with my polling methods to reveal the truth. There's nothing more I can think of that I could do that would be helpful in understanding this.
Right. Could you explain us the methodology and what really caused this tectonic shift, so to say? Who are the large voting groups who are now backing Kamala Harris, according to you?
Yeah, my methodology I call polling forward. That is, I first take I gather together a cross-section of the entire state of Iowa, and I balance that to the census. Those are known population parameters. And then I extract from that larger pool, over 1,000 people, the 808 who qualify as a likely voter. And that is, they say they've already voted, or they say they will definitely vote. If they say they'll probably vote, that's not strong enough for me. So it's a pretty rigid screen. And what a lot of other polling firms is to take into account things that happened in the past. So I call that polling backward, that they'll look at exit poll numbers, they'll look at the demographics of the way things worked before, and then apply them to the current campaign. I think that's polling backwards, and I think that to me, that has some hazards that go with it. What's happening in this poll, we saw it in September with a giant surge for Kamala Harris. She didn't surpass Trump, but she closed an 18-point edge that Trump had over Joe Biden to just 4 points. So this was sort of in the cards, and what we saw happening is that more people were qualifying to be as likely voters. Not that they had voted already in September, but that they said they would definitely vote. And the demographics of those people who were saying in bigger numbers they would definitely vote were women, were younger voters, were people with a college education. In short, demographics that aligned with Kamala Harris. So it isn't that our data do not say that people moved from Trump to Harris. More people got in the game, and they tended to be Harris voters.
All right. So you're seeing the younger voters, new voters, independent, undecided ones are probably backing Kamala Harris in a big way?
Well, we still have some undecided people in our poll. You see, neither one of the candidates gets to 50%. So there's some wiggle room here for things to change up. We've got 3% who say they're voting for Robert Kennedy Jr. He's on our ballot. They could shift and go a different way. We've got 1% saying they'd vote for somebody else. We've got some people who say they still haven't made up their minds. And we've got some people who say they've already voted, and for either they don't remember who they voted for, or they just don't want to tell us. So there's enough room, there are enough percentage points there that this could all change. when they start counting the votes on election night. But the things that I think are terribly important to know is that her Kamala Harris's margin among women aged 65 and over is more than 2-1. She gets more than 60% among that group. And that is the group that has the strongest turnout as we measure it in our poll. Like 93, 94% of the people we talk to in that age and sex group say they will definitely vote or have already voted. And independent
Right.
women have shifted. In earlier polls this year, they were voting in majorities for Donald Trump, and now they're in majorities for Kamala Harris. So one of the things driving this, we speculate, is that the abortion ban went into effect in July. So our June poll that had Donald Trump with a big lead shrank and then shrank again, actually with Kamala Harris leapfrogging over him into first place. One of the things that we know, two things. We know that a majority of Iowans think that all or most abortions should be legal. We know that the congressional race, we have 4 congressional districts, all of them held by Republicans. In the first district, which has been an intense race about abortion, the Democratic challenger is leading by 20
Right.
points. So it suggests
Right.
to us that abortion is a big issue here.
Abortion is a big issue. And in fact, it was a very big issue for Indian Americans as well, if we saw the survey conducted by the Carnegie Endowment Center. But do these numbers give you confidence that Iowa will be a bellwether? It is reflecting the national mood and the mood in all the 7 swing states?
You are never going to have me say I'm confident. There's always things I can imagine that can happen. This particular election cycle, we have had a series of dramatic things happen that can change the race. And when people say, well, what's going to happen? I go, well, what's going to happen this afternoon? Because there are still things that can happen that can change the race.
Right. And how do you see the reaction of Donald Trump to the Iowa poll?
Well, I understand. I haven't seen it directly that he said some things about me that were not very complimentary, that I'm a Trump hater. He didn't call me a Trump lover in 2020 when our poll, same methodology, showed
But he
him
praised
leading.
you at that time.
Exactly. So this is common that when candidates don't like the poll, then they denigrate the pollster. And I've been in this chair before, so I'm not rattled.
All right. So let me just ask you, where do you think Kamala Harris stands right now? Do you think, and this is just a personal view based on the numbers that we're getting, yes, she has a 1-point lead nationally, but do you think she will be able to garner enough votes to reach the magic number of 270?
You know, there are plenty of people out there who do that for a living, is try to get to 270 every which way. That Iowa now might be contributing its 6 electoral votes. You can see that's the same number Nevada has. So that could be offsetting some changes from the way things are polling now. I'm just not a predictor. I have a crystal ball collection, but I don't use it for work.
All right. The significance of Iowa compared to Pennsylvania right now, because all eyes are on Pennsylvania.
Agreed. And I think the reason is it's so close. The polls have been going back and forth and back and forth. And they've got a lot of electoral votes to contribute. So winning there is kind of a jackpot among the swing states that are outstanding there. And Pennsylvania is particularly interesting, as people have said, that it's, you know, Pittsburgh on the western border, Philadelphia on the eastern border, and then in the middle of the state, Alabama. Now, my sister just moved away from State College, Pennsylvania, which is where Penn State is. And that's not exactly Alabama, but most of the rest of the state is rural, much like Iowa. And so we'll see how this all balances out. And really, the Philadelphia suburbs are key. They're very swingy, and just depends on what the turnout is there, how many women turn out there. I'm eager for election night to see how the end of the story, how all of these possible endings turn out.
Right. But do you feel that the women voters in America will be deciding this election?
There's a case certainly in Iowa for that. Kamala Harris is winning by 20 points among women. Donald Trump is winning by 14 points among men. And other pollsters who work with candidates and with campaigns have said, you know, if you're a Democratic candidate, you need to win with women more than you lose with men. And that's exactly the state of the game right here in Iowa.
Right. And finally, what do you think has contributed to the decline in numbers in Iowa for Donald Trump?
I think the abortion issue is big. I think he is running a negative campaign, you know, compared to Kamala Harris, who's e pluribus unum, our national motto, out of many, one. And he is divisive. And, you know, it may be, this is speculation and just what I observe, that they've had enough of that. Again, this is observational. I'm seeing very few Trump yard signs. And 4 years ago, they were plentiful. You saw them everywhere. And it doesn't mean that there are necessarily households that used to vote for Trump but aren't now. But it does mean that there's visibly an advantage, at least, you know, the roads I travel on, for Kamala Harris. I did see one interesting yard sign that was Mitt Romney 2024. Not on the ballot.
Right. Okay, and finally, how do you respond to all that criticism, enthusiasm, praise for your poll on social media? There's been lots on it over the last 24 hours or so.
You know, this is probably the biggest poll drop in my lifetime. There was a caucus poll back in 2008 that got a lot of attention, but this is by far the poll heard around the world. And that's, you know, that's some pressure. That's some anxiety for me. I like my polls to be right, no matter who it is. And we'll see what happens. I'm not terribly bothered by the criticisms because most of the people are saying things like, I've been bought. I said, well, I have clients who have paid for my work, but I don't really understand the mechanism where I would be paid to deliver data that that I manipulated in some way. I don't even know how that would begin to work. So I'm not bothered by that. And the praise, may it be true.
All right. All the best to you, Ann Selzer. And let's hope your poll comes out to be true as well. It'll all be clear in the next 24 to 48 hours. We have to take a short break at this point, but on the other side, Trump and Harris are heading towards a photo finish in the race to the White House. Foreign policy has been a hallmark of the presidential election campaigning. A special conversation with Lisa Curtis up next. You're watching our special broadcast on the eve of the U.S. presidential elections. The winner of the race to the White House will have significant geopolitical ramifications as the person gets to dictate U.S. foreign policy. Trump, as we had seen during the first presidency, is a disruptor-in-chief who does not shy away from rocking the boat. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, would not significantly deviate from the Biden administration's strategy. Let me go across to Lisa Curtis, Director, Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for New American Security. Thank you very much for joining us on the show today, Lisa Curtis. Let me begin by asking you, is foreign policy a major issue on the ballot in America?
Well, I think it is an issue, but I think domestic issues are even more important right now. Immigration, crime, the economy, inflation. These are really the issues that are driving the campaigns of both candidates. Foreign policy came more into play when we saw the debates, both the debate between former President Trump and Vice President Harris, as well as the vice presidential candidates. So at that time, I think we saw more of a focus on foreign policy. But lately, I think the issues have really been domestic. They've been focused on the issues I just discussed. They've also been focused on how each side is campaigning. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of attacks, on each candidate, as well as some rhetoric, some unseemly rhetoric that's been happening here. So that's unfortunate. It would be better if both sides stuck to the issues at hand, but we have seen some of that happening in the last few weeks. But I do expect that, most people will be placing their votes based largely on their concerns about what's happening inside the United States.
Lisa Curtis, do you believe that the harsh stand that Donald Trump has taken on immigration has also on issues such as abortion, that has led women in America across communities to unify, also the Asian Americans, the African Americans to unite maybe in favor of Kamala Harris?
Well, I don't think it's really that simple. I think what we've seen is a lot of differences in how these communities are reacting, how they're responding. For instance, we saw that Black male Americans weren't necessarily supporting Kamala Harris. This is why former President Obama came out and lectured them, trying to get them to, change their support to Kamala Harris. This was unexpected. Also, the Latina vote, that's been very unpredictable in terms of where that's going. And we have seen Trump be able to get some of those communities that you might normally see voting Democratic, supporting him for various reasons. Maybe it's about the economy. Maybe it's about immigration. I think people don't understand that legal immigrants to the United States often become very angry about illegal immigration. So that has actually been in Trump's favor, that he has come down so hard on illegal immigration. That's even gotten him support from some minority communities in the United States. So what I'm trying to say is there has been a complete breakdown of sort of the conventional wisdom with this election. Individuals are voting who they feel will be the best candidate for their own sort of personal interest. And that varies, as we can see, by our very divided electorate.
Right. Do you feel that today the institutions in the United States, especially after the violence that we have seen at Capitol Hill in 2020, do you think today the institutions in the US are far stronger? They are ready to deal with any kind of challenge, legal challenge that may be thrown up by the Donald Trump camp after the election?
I do think that our institutions at every level, whether it be local, state, or national, are prepared for potential challenges to the election results. And I do think that we will have challenges. It stands to reason. We have a divided electorate. We have a very close election. What that means is, both sides are going to have difficulty accepting defeat. So I think we will see a lot of challenges. And this also means we probably won't know the results for many weeks, maybe even months. because the challenges will likely go to the courts, and the courts will have to make these decisions. So I think this is what we're faced with. We're likely to see results taking a while, quite possibly, and we're also likely to see a lot of challenges, people not accepting the results. And of course, there's more concern about if Harris were to win, there's more concern about the Trump camp accepting the results because of what we saw on January 6, 2020. But I think on both sides, I think there's concern that either side might have difficulty accepting the result because it is so close.
Right. Kamala Harris, considering the fact that she is an Indian American and Asian American, how do you think she has drawn voters in this election? How do you think she has matured from a vice president to a presidential candidate in just a span of a few months?
Well, I think she's had a lot of on-the-job experience serving as vice president over the last 3.5 years. She has done a lot of traveling. She's gotten a lot of foreign policy, as you know, as well as national security experience. She has already had experience campaigning. So I think actually the last few months, she wasn't completely out of her depth or her realm. She's competed in a lot of elections in the past and has had experience. So I think, you know, she has campaigned hard. She has showed up where she needs to show up. She has done a lot of media. She's been everywhere, all kinds of different media. But so has Trump. This has been one of the most active campaigns, you know, that I can certainly remember by both candidates. They've literally held rallies almost every day, and they're everywhere, including today. I think Trump is going to be in 3 states today. He's going to be in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And I think the Vice President Harris is going to spend her time in Pennsylvania because, of course, that is what this election could come down to. That's sort of seen as the most important battleground state right now. So I think that, you know, she's had plenty of experience, and she, you know, has given this fight her all, her best. And now we'll have to see where the chips fall.
Right. I'd like to ask you about Donald Trump. It is said that the only reason why Donald Trump wants to fight this election and wants to be re-elected is because he wants to stay out of jail. What will be the consequences, the legal consequences emanating from all the criminal trials against Donald Trump if he doesn't win the election?
Well, of course, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really comment on what these various charges are going to amount to. They haven't amounted to much so far. And I think that, you know, to answer your first question, no, he's not running to stay out of jail. He's running because he wants to be president of the United States. He feels that, you know, he did a good job the first time around, and that, you know, he wants to finish the job that he started in his first term. So I think he's determined to you know, to try to win, and it has really nothing to do with any of these charges or cases against him. And what happens if he doesn't win? What happens with those cases? I suppose they continue to play out. But, you know, we might see that some of the people that have brought these cases aren't as vigorous about the cases as maybe they have been over the last year.
Lisa, what's at stake in the Indo-Pacific? We've seen a lot of strides being made by India, US, Japan, and Australia in the last 4 years of the Biden administration. In fact, Indo-Pacific has been a work in progress for the last 10 years. Give us a sense of how this election outcome could impact the cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, and is there anything that concerns you?
Well, I did say that most of the current focus of the election campaigns is on domestic issues. But I assure you, whoever takes the seat in January 20th, 2025, one of the first foreign policy issues they're going to have to deal with is the Indo-Pacific, the rise of China. This is simply, the number one challenge for U.S. foreign policy and national security right now, and it will quickly be on the radar screen of whoever is elected. But I think what you can see is a consistency in the evolution of U.S. policy toward China over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years. Toward the end of the Trump administration, it became very clear that the historical policy of trying to accommodate China, trying to include China in international institutions, was not having the desired effect of making China a responsible stakeholder in the international system, that the opposite was happening, that China was increasingly aggressive and, stealing technology from the U.S., really becoming a challenge on all fronts and a competitor. Let's face it, the United States is in a fierce competition with China. So the Trump administration started to address these challenges. The Biden administration continued to address those challenges with, export controls, with, restrictions on U.S. outbound investment into China. This has happened more recently. And I fully expect that if Trump were elected, his China policies would continue the same and probably institute even more measures in order for the U.S. to be able to address competition with China, to be able to maintain that rules-based order in the region that I think India also supports and has been working with the United States through groupings like the Quad and other initiatives. So I fully expect that whoever is elected, this will be at the top of their foreign policy agenda as soon as they take power in January.
All right, Lisa Curtis, thank you very much for joining us. Clearly, China will be big on the next U.S. president's mind, and it will be a priority area considering we've seen tensions between U.S. and China for the last 8 years now. India also has had its set of tensions with China, and we've recently resolved border tensions in the eastern Ladakh region. So let's see what happens in the next few weeks. The U.S. elections will also have a significant impact on the global economy, trade, financial markets and emerging economies like India. Lata Venkatesh is here to explain.
Well, let's start with how Trump and Harris are perceived for each of the financial markets. Trump victory is seen as very positive for equity markets and very negative for bonds. Trump win is also seen making dollar stronger, and that'll have its repercussions. But first, the macros. On the macros, both Trump and Harris policies may lead to widening of the U.S. fiscal deficit, but Trump will widen the fiscal deficit much more than Harris. Trump policies are seen pushing inflation higher. Harris win could mean, therefore, lower inflation. Hence, on growth, because of higher inflation, growth may be lower under Trump policies, but growth could be better under Harris. Trump victory will mean higher interest rates and stronger dollar. Therefore, it will be the opposite under Harris, that is slightly weaker dollar and slightly lower rates. Now, the non-profit think tank called Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, or CRFB, sees Harris's policies increasing the U.S. deficit by $3.95 trillion by 2035. But Trump is going to be worse. His policies may increase the U.S. deficit by $7.75 trillion, actually by double by 2035. The CFRB says following programs of Harris will increase expenses, extension of tax cuts for families that are earning less than $400,000, expanding the child tax credit to help families in lower income with more children, expanding the Affordable Care Act, which means higher insurance subsidies, supporting affordable housing, and increasing the minimum wage. The amounts are given on the right. I'm not reading them. Now, Harris will also bring in more revenues. She will raise revenues by upping the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%, increasing capital gains tax. Now, that's why it's equity negative, upping the Medicare tax, reforming international tax rules, and lowering the cost of prescription drugs. That will, of course, mean lower revenue outgo. Trump is going to increase deficit by, of course, cutting taxes. We all know that, cutting taxes for corporates under the TCJA, that is Tax Cuts Job Act. Exempt tips and overtime from taxes. Actually, Harris also has promised that. He will also end taxation of Social Security benefits. That's a huge outgo. And he will also spend less by reducing illegal immigrants into the country. Trump is going to raise revenues through tariffs and more tariffs. He will also reverse the energy policy and will exempt oil output. Of course, that's not his area. He will also end some education support programs. Let's come to immigration. On immigration, Harris will favor increasing legal immigration, while Trump is going to reduce all immigration across the board. Thus, Trump may actually end up tightening the labor market, and this can especially hurt infotech companies, IT companies. So what's in it for emerging markets like India? A Harris win may lead to continuation of the present trends largely, but a Trump win by strengthening the US dollar will likely lead to weaker EM currencies. More importantly, China is expected to retaliate the tariffs that Trump is expected to impose by weakening its own currency, weakening the renminbi, which will force other Asian EMs to also depreciate their currencies, including India. They are likely to weaken their currencies in competitive depreciation. Trump may reduce the space for emerging market central banks to cut rates. He may have a negative impact on global growth and therefore emerging market growth because of the likely supply disruptions he may cause by higher tariffs. But here's the silver lining. In the emerging market group, Indian economy and the Indian rupee is seen least affected by Trump's policies.
With that, it's a wrap on our special broadcast. More news and updates continue right here.